We are back, Jujutsukaisen bros, we are so back. It's been a solid couple of years, but Jujutsu Kaisen, one of the most refreshingly creative looking anime led by one of the most refreshingly creative directors, is finally back, and I'm glad to report it's as good as ever. The first two episodes of the highly anticipated Jujutsu Kaisen Season 3 were exactly what you'd expect them to be. They were textbook examples of creative people ditching the textbook and doing their own thing, of creative people being creative, and I wouldn't have it any other way. They were wonderfully directed, they were well animated, they were eye-catching in all the right ways, they were amazing, minor issues and all. As such, as always and as expected, let's break down the visuals. Make sure to subscribe if you like this video. Chances are you'll also like the 17,000 more Jujutsu Kaisen videos I'll upload in the coming weeks and months, so subscribe. You can also become a member of this channel. Members get at least 2 exclusive videos per month, custom badges and emojis, shoutouts and more. Just go down there and press the join button. As always, let's start with the staff list. Both episodes were storyboarded by series director Goshozono, with him doubling down as the episode director for the first episode and assistant director Yusuke Takada taking on that role for episode 2. Now, it's practically mandatory for me at this point to suffix the name Shota Goshozono with something along the lines of one of the most creative minds in the industry, which he is. And as you'd expect from a Shota Goshozono production, the episodes were filled with unorthodox composition choices, highly competent animation, and an oxymoronic sense of familiarity in its sheer refusal to do anything familiar, or in other words, the direction and storyboards good for the most part. Over on the drawing front, episode 1 had 2 chief animation directors in the 2 character designers Hiromi Niwa and Yusuke Ajima, 2 animation directors, a small but stacked key animator list, and an entire army of second key animators outnumbering the key animators 7-1, which is just tradition at this point. Episode 2 meanwhile had 4 CADs, the aforementioned 2 alongside JJK regulars Sota Yamazaki and Mitsue Mori, 7 ADs, a longer KA list, and a slightly smaller second key animator army. Overall, not bad by MAPPA's admittedly low standards. The episodes themselves were extremely solid animation-wise. They were wild in a methodical sense, let's put it that way. Setting aside the respectable amount of movement, the episodes didn't shy away from having several different approaches to movement, which, if that's not your cup of tea, I'm afraid this season is not for you. Depending on the situation, the animation took on many different forms, be it the weighty, kinetic sequence of Yuji fighting the curses, the spectacular unrestrained fight between Chozo and Naoya, or the unorthodox hyperdynamic Yuji vs Yuta. The show isn't afraid to, for lack of a better phrase, filter out some of the normies with its visuals, a bold choice given the series' global popularity, but an unsurprising one given director Goshozono and the rest of the team's track record both with this very show as well as other titles. It is, however, worth mentioning that these episodes weren't perfect. They had issues, minor issues, but issues nonetheless. Of course, I'll get into the specifics in a bit, but basically the level of polish wasn't as high as I had expected from the first 2 episodes of a production of this caliber. I wonder if it's because they're trying to give the latter episodes more time, or because they had to rush the first 2 episodes a bit because of that advanced screening thing, perhaps a combination of both, who knows. Anyway, with all that being said, let's finally go through these episodes scene by scene, starting with episode 1. The episode opened up with some trademark Goshozono storyboards. This opening shot, for example, it was so eye-catching. Besides the cinemascope aspect ratio, you had the first background layer, the character cell, and another background layer on top, making the composition feel dynamic and spacious. Also loved the compositing here, the volumetric lighting, aka those streaks of light meant to represent the reflective nature of the glass, coupled with the bloom effect, looks perfect, and the light rays changing position gives the illusion that these things are moving, despite the fact that they are part of the background layer, meaning they are entirely static. Animation-wise, the scene had very little going on, just a tiny Yuji moving in the corner, but it looked amazing regardless thanks to the clever composition and compositing. Moving on, the animation in this shot is a bit wonky. It's hard to tell given the blurring, but the lines don't appear to be particularly consistent, and even the sleeves are slightly off sync, but it's fine overall. Nitpicks aside, there are so many unique compositions here, too many to go through. Once again, Goshozono is a master of framing. He knows exactly how to draw the viewer's eyes towards whatever he wants their eyes drawn to. He knows exactly how much visual information to convey in each shot, ensuring the viewer is neither overstimulated nor bored. He is insanely good, plus the shots conveyed a ton of intent. The whole idea here was to convey Yuji's mental isolation and self-hate, and Goshozono portrayed that perfectly. Him washing his hands but the blood refusing to come off, his eyes, aka the most human part of a character, being blocked out. Genius. More about the animation, this entire section and the scene that followed, basically everything before the OP, was animated by Takafumi Mitani, which is particularly cool because he also animated the first scene of Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2, and while not perfect, his work was really impressive. This shot was insanely fun and a perfect example of Goshozono's dynamic, spacious compositions. The background layers form a horizon and the curse is placed behind it, except its arm, which is actually in front of the horizon, with a strong foreshortening effect since it's closer to the camera, with the effect getting stronger as it gets closer. Now, most sane directors would end the shot here, but not Goshozono. Yuji starts running and the camera pans backwards, revealing that the background is actually 3D. Brilliant. Absolutely breathtaking piece of background art here with some solid creature animation, and again, every single shot is incredibly complex and layered. This one, for example, you have the super background sky, the super background building, 2D effects over it, another background layer in the windows and stuff, and a second cell layer of Yuta, so that's 5 layers of visual information. Wow. By the way, don't let my obsession with the storyboards fool you, the actual animation was really impressive as well. The body mechanics felt heavy and impactful, with every action being consistently drawn to convey the maximum amount of weight. The background work, be it 3D or otherwise, and the motion blurring helped with that. Things weren't perfect though, this shot looked stiff. I don't like how Yuji's head went downwards and just froze. Also, him jumping out of the window was quite janky, and I didn't like how we saw him running towards the window in one shot and halfway in the air in the next one without any visual indicator of him jumping. Shortly afterwards, we had this shot where the curse is clearly damaging the buildings by brushing against them, but when the smoke clears, the buildings are intact. Obviously, because they're a background layer. This makes the shot look flat, hindering the illusion of volume and three-dimensionality that Goshozono loves to convey. None of this is significant, of course, but the first episode, which on paper should be the most polished, having issues like these isn't exactly a good sign. Anyway, the curse itself was quite well drawn. Also, shout out to the random 2D poles, I appreciate the effort, it was good, just, small things here and there, things most fans won't even notice. Another thing about Goshozono is that he's excellent at making a lack of movement feel intentional. Near the end of Mitani's sequence, we had a 20-second shot of the camera panning up a still frame followed by another 20-second still frame with some simple looped effects near the end. So that's around 40 seconds that needed just 2 character drawings, a small amount of looped effects and some compositing tricks, and it didn't look awkward whatsoever. That man is a genius. We then got to Teppei Okuda's sequence, and once again we had ambitious, dynamic and meaningful storyboards and less than stellar animation. The acting had a certain amount of stiffness to it with some occasional melt. It was ambitious, absolutely. I'm sure Goshozono's storyboards didn't make life any easier for Okuda, but I wouldn't exactly call it polished. This shot, for example, there are unintentional distracting jumps between the poses, giving it that stiffness I talked about. Negativity aside, I loved the complex framing here and the drawings kept up. The room feeling claustrophobic because it's too small for all 3 of them, symbolism for the power struggles within the Zenin clan was a brilliant idea. By the way, don't make the mistake of thinking these shots were stills, they weren't. The characters might be static, but the actual shadows were animated back and forth constantly. Also worth mentioning, some meticulously animated shoe tying here. As you may know, small movements like these are hell to animate, so props to the team, a very fun scene overall. We then had this section, and while there wasn't much going on animation-wise, the drawings, Yosuke Ajima corrections I believe, color use and background art was insanely good. We also had more of Goshozono's Hall of Fame tier resourcefulness. Yuji climbing down the stairs only to end up at the top over and over again had symbolic meaning. It represented his isolation, and it allowed the team to reuse the same shot by chopping it up, 2 birds with 1 stone. By the way, the actual stair climbing was quite well animated, albeit slightly melty. I know I said the scene didn't have much going on animation-wise, but this was nice. Also a really well-drawn fist curl here. And speaking of hands, a tremendously well-drawn pair of hands then brought us to the most technically impressive part of this episode, in my opinion. Unpopular opinion perhaps? I don't know. This entire section was animated by Masahiro Tokumaru, and even if you aren't familiar with that name, chances are you've seen some of his work before. Remember those intricately choreographed fights from the anime Vivi, the ones that were plastered all over the internet back in the day? Well, most of them were penned by Tokumaru, and more recently, he did a ton of work for the sports anime Oblivion Battery, animating many of its highlights and directing and storyboarding the most impressive looking episode of it. Needless biographies aside, the point is, Tokumaru is excellent at kinetic motion, at weighty body mechanics, and he loves using 3D in his workflow, and both of those skills were visible throughout this entire sequence. The scene started with this large-scale shot that I've talked about before in a trailer breakdown. The sense of three-dimensionality was off the charts, and the three-tone liquid animation complete with these vertical lines looked amazing. We then got this cut with those classic Tokumaru effects. The liquid had tons of organic, individually animated shapes, lineless ones of course, because how cool is that? A thing I loved about this entire section was its use of long, continuous motion. The action didn't hide behind stop-and-go payoffs, not that there's anything wrong with that, instead it kept moving. The curses, for example, their movement was so smooth and had this weird sense of weight and flow because they never stopped moving. Also, the drawings themselves were incredibly consistent and volumetric, which added to the three-dimensionality of this shot. Speaking of the third dimension, I'll be honest, the 3D bridge does look a bit clunky, especially in this wide shot, but the unorthodox camera placements and Yuji's top-notch body mechanics more than made up for it. There's so much weight behind Yuji's run, jump, and subsequent freefall. Again, it's not stop-and-go motion, rather it's smooth, continuous animation made possible by Tokumaru's excellent draftsmanship. The placement of every single frame is methodical with the goal of making the curses and Yuji feel like actual physical bodies with consistent weight and volume. We then got this bird's eye, or rather this curse's eye view of the entire city, meaning yes, they modeled the entire thing in 3D just for these few seconds of footage, a luxury most other shows can't even think of affording, and it was worth it in my opinion. Also, a lot of these curse insides were either 3D or 3D assisted. Again, Tokumaru loves his CGI, but they didn't look out of place given the consistent character animation. The framing throughout this entire section was absolutely top-notch. Here's an example, why frame Yuji simply hanging from a balcony when you can add an extra building with broken walls that reveal parts of the interior? But wait, what if that's too much? What if the viewer doesn't know where to look? Well, fear not, because 1. The relevant building is lit while the rest are dark, and 2. The composition itself naturally guides your eyes towards the focus. Again, genius. While we're on the topic, as impressive as the compositions were, I do have a few issues with the storyboarding. This section, for example, Yuji jumps down and in the next shot he has already landed, letting the build-up of the previous shot go to waste. Then in the very next shot we see him mid-run without ever seeing him get up and start running. We can figure that part out ourselves obviously, but it looks clunky in motion. I'm sure some of you will call this nitpicking, but I have to point this stuff out. Anyway, the curses were incredibly well animated. The weight behind their movement was outstanding, especially because many of them had unorthodox anatomies, the kind you can't use real-life references for. Also, the untextured 3D backgrounds looked amazing, and these shots animated on once looked eerily smooth. Pretty sure they're not auto in between, which makes them even more impressive. Tokumaru's outstanding 2.5-minute sequence was finally brought to a close with some incredible drawings, Yajima corrections again I believe, and some fantastic liquid effects. We then got some fun shorthand drawings followed by the Naoya fight animated by Teppei Okuda, which was really fun. The motion was extremely smooth, and if you thought Naoya's movement was choppy, that there were frames missing, well, mission accomplished, because that's the point, that's literally what his ability is. As per usual, the compositions were off the charts with an unparalleled sense of space and distance. Even the backgrounds were heavily warped at times to convey that effect. The Naoya fight was followed by Yuta's appearance, which was accompanied by Shinsaku Kozuma's easily recognizable effects with those sharp geometric edges and some solid acting. Love the parallax here. As far as I can tell, the background isn't 3D, it's just some clever fragmentation of the PG illustration and panning, although I'm not entirely sure. The episodes also used a ton of these short reverse shots, at least that's what I think they're called. Shots where the composition remains the same but the camera flips 180 degrees. Goshozono used a lot of those here. This shot was cool in concept, I get what they were going for and I understand how difficult it is to draw a shot from that perspective, but in motion it just looks a bit comical, not a fan. Anyway, that brief chase sequence then brought us to Yuji vs Yuta, and I have opinions. Firstly, it seems like the entire fight was animated by Takafumi Mitani, meaning he animated 7 solid minutes, around a third of the episode, which insane. And the animation throughout the fight was pretty solid, it's just I don't know how I feel about some of the storyboarding choices. Let's go through it in order. This first exchange looks a bit off to me, not a fan of the weird zoom in, and the whole thing seems to lack the sense of flow it was going for with those quick cuts. As an example, the energy/build up here was stopped dead in its tracks by this slow motion shot, and the shot that followed didn't build up enough energy for the shot that came after it to feel natural. Does that make sense? Watch it again, maybe you'll understand what I mean. I did love these long exchanges, the actions made sense, it wasn't just I'll swing wildly and you dodge, every single slash was carefully thought out. Also, the animation was really solid, the movement wasn't particularly tight or snappy, but that was the intention, to convey motion that's more natural and loose. This shot looked really mediocre, unfortunately. Yuuji ragdolling looked incredibly stiff and janky with massive jumps between key poses and a complete lack of energy near the end. It looked like Yuuji rolled over for absolutely no reason whatsoever, like it was a video game and the player had high ping. Even the debris animation melted a fair bit, plus some of the drawings and movement around it weren't exactly stellar. We did have more of Mitani's loose natural body mechanics, so at least there's that, but the issues were evident. Regardless, really strong drawings here, followed by a ridiculous bit of background animation. The entire background, including the car and its interior, was hand animated, which of course is insane. But once again, the storyboards were a bit iffy. Goshozono tried to do that thing where you use a lot of quick cuts and each cut flows into the next one seamlessly, kinda like what Itsuki Tsuchigami occasionally does, but I don't think he got the timing right. The editing just felt clunky, the flow was almost there but not quite in my opinion, the transfer of energy between shots was imperfect. I don't know, am I the only one? I'm a massive storyboarding nerd, so I see both what Goshozono was going for and how he didn't quite get there, but do let me know what you guys think. Anyway, some lovely drawings and curse animation then brought us to the end of episode 1. Long story short, a fairly impressive work, but not one without its issues. Episode 2 started with a couple of really smooth walk cycles, some spacious compositions, some insane background art, and this absolutely spectacular fight. Many of those action scenes are presumed to be the work of Yakumo Crack, an animator who caught my eye with his work on Shield Hero Season 3. Initially, a lot of people thought those scenes were animated either by Goshozono himself or by Rui, since both have animated similar shots before. I was in the Goshozono camp by the way, but that doesn't appear to be the case. It still looks a bit Goshozono-esque to me, but whatever. Anyway, I've talked about these shots before. They are a textbook example of that flow over form mentality that makes 2D animation so special. The idea was to convey speed, force, and intensity, and good god did they succeed. They weren't afraid to distort and twist the character models to their utmost limits, literally breaking them at times. It's the kind of sequence fans scream in complete animation or I can't tell what's happening at. Both very wrong opinions, by the way. As impressive as the animation was, we need to talk about the art direction and the compositing. These Shinya Ohira-inspired pencil lines added by the latter looked amazing, and the distorted intensity of the animation was perfectly complemented by the warped backgrounds. Fantastic work. We then got Fei Hung's sequence, which had a similar flow over form philosophy, although it wasn't as over the top. Also worth mentioning, this sequence used that quick cuts method of action storyboarding that Yuji vs Yuta used, but it was executed better. The flow was flowing, if that makes sense. Some solid character acting, brilliant compositions, and 3D background black magic then brought us to Keiichiro Watanabe's sequence, and once again, I have opinions. Animation-wise, it was outstanding, one of Watanabe's career best, and think of how much territory that takes in. The wild, unrestrained motion, the iconic flowy timing, those trademark effects, a tremendous amount of background animation, it was outstanding. I just wish I could see any of it. What the f just happened here? Why did they butcher Watanabe's work like this? Why? The scene was drowned out in red, making it feel a bit one note and making it difficult to appreciate the drawings, which would have been bad enough on its own, but on top of that, they decided to blur everything, as well as add this light flicker and dim effect, which made the animation practically incomprehensible. Don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with the movement itself being difficult to follow, that's the point, and I don't have a problem with directors prioritizing the overall screen instead of the raw 2D animation, as long as the overall screen looks better than said raw 2D animation, which was not the case here. From what I've seen, the advanced screening didn't have that obnoxious blurring and dimming. I haven't seen it, but based on what I've heard, it didn't, which makes it particularly bizarre. In the back of my mind, I can kinda see what they were going for, enhancing the uncanny nature of Watanabe's animation with the blurring, but I don't think it worked at all. Anyway, this was cool though. Loved the black and white negative film aesthetic, especially because they didn't bury the outstanding drawings. Good stuff. Moving on, we had a lot of dialogue, but thanks to Goshozono's storyboarding, it didn't feel boring. The compositions were consistently outstanding, so much so that they could linger on nearly if not outright static shots for long periods of time without it feeling awkward. Of course, we did have a decent bit of character acting, some shots executed better than others, but by and large it wasn't exactly a sakuga fest. Plus, some of the drawings weren't perfect, the drawing supervision was a bit inconsistent. Despite all that though, the shots looked captivating, which hey, that's Shota Goshozono for you. He'll find a way to make things look interesting no matter what. And those were the episodes, a great way to start the season, inconsistencies and all. As a general rule of thumb, any new Goshozono is good Goshozono, and that's doubly true if he isn't actively being f***ed over by the schedule, so this was great. I don't know how well this season will fare in the long run. Based on everything I've heard, the answer should be a lot better than season 2, but you never know, so I'll end this video on an optimistic, hoping for the best. That's about it. A special thanks to Noot03, Amir and the Gallus90 for becoming tier 3 members, and until next time.